You're listening to the Razor to Razor podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com for all your racing merchandise needs. I'm your co-host, Aaron Mack. To other co-hosts, you may have seen walking out of Great Clips with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him in a dirt track. He is the one and only Scott Bowie. So this is the for obviously no one knows this is listening or watching this. This is like our fifth time doing this intro because I just can't contain myself today, and I'm just laughing every time I try to do this. So we're finally able to do this, which is a good thing.
Yes, no, it was funny though watching you crack up. So Aaron has been on special assignment this past week. What Aaron, would you like to share where you've been?
I wouldn't really say it was special assignment because I was more there as a fan, but yeah, I was at the 24 Hours of Daytona. So really cool experience. Always like going there. I will say I've been there. I don't even know how many times now, probably like 5 times. And this time was by far the worst weather that they've ever had with me being there. It was raining most of the day, Thursday, a little bit Friday. And then it was just cold yesterday. It was cold on Saturday, just really cold. And we got up early and it was colder there than it is in Indiana. So not good weather at all, but still great. Any day that you can spend Daytona International Speedway definitely is a great day. So no complaints there. I started taking photos as well, and I showed you some of the photos that I took. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was,
and they're good too. And I don't know if Aaron will end up showing any of those photos or not, but the photos that you sent me were really good. They, I mean, for especially a novice and somebody who's just learning, man, hats off to you. There's a couple that, man, I would definitely frame and put on a wall. So
yeah, and so the one car is the Colton Herta Pato Award, Eric Lux, and Dave. I don't know how to say his name. Delvin Dan Francisco.
Devlin DeFrancisco.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So that was the team. They actually won their class LMP2, I believe. And so I took that picture of that car, and like it's just the colors just really popped with the Ferris wheel. So it was dark out. And I actually posted it on my personal Instagram, and I tagged all the drivers, and that Eric Lux, who's one of the drivers, actually reposted it on his story. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
No, it's a great photo, man. And it's, man, taking photos is tough. That's hard.
Yeah, it took time.
That's a hard skill. There's the truly great ones. I mean, they're able to somehow or another tell a story with their photo, which that takes a while to get to, I'm sure. But your stuff looked good, man.
Yeah, all of the photos I took like on the first day, none of them are really any good because it takes at least a day to figure out how to do it. You think you got it, but it's just getting the focus right and following with the car and taking pictures and getting the settings right on the camera. That's another big thing. But I think I'm in the right direction now. So I'll be looking forward to doing that in May. Get some pictures of some Indy cars.
That what was the start like? Was the start pretty? I mean, it had a big crowd there, right? This year they had a pretty big crowd.
Yeah, so and it's pretty crazy. Like even after 24 hours, like the cars are pretty close. I mean, you think about the past few years at the Rolex 24, like the finish, it comes down to cars passing for the lead with just, a few laps left to go. So
those guys were banging on each other.
Yeah, exactly. So it's amazing how close the cars stay together, and the starts are always really close. And then, they get a little more spread out, but, pit stops and everything, cautions, bunch them back together. But we'll do a little recap of the race. But before we do that, so our guest today is Alex Lloyd, former IndyCar driver, a big standout. And I guess I don't think it was called the Road to Indy back then, but big standout in the latter Series 2 IndyCar. Completely almost swept the entire Indy Lights season. Won the championship. I think won the Freedom 100. Great guy. He was definitely a rising star in IndyCar racing, and he drove in several Indy 500s, and it was just really, really great to get to talk to him. And I knew he would be a good interview, but I think we both would agree that I think he probably is one of the most honest guests we've ever had.
I agree, and yeah, that's the fairest assessment there is, and he just flat talks about his time, being a big time race car driver
Yeah.
and having no money, doing it basically for free. And he goes into that, and hats off to him, because that's a big ego blow to some guys, and I understand why. And but for him to be that honest, it really, that type of honesty makes you makes me a fan of you,
Absolutely.
and I really walked away from this discussion a big fan of Alex Lloyd. So,
Oh, great
um,
guy.
yeah,
Big
absolutely great guy.
Yeah, no, and definitely, we'll definitely have him back on again if he'd come on, because he was great to talk to. And maybe, I know we've talked about we'll definitely do some kind of Indy 500 preview show, but I definitely think he'd be great for that.
Yeah, man, and I think he'd be excellent at that. And I just, again, he's just his
Yeah, and he took,
honesty.
we talked to him for like 2 hours,
Yeah,
so we really appreciate, all the time that, he gave us. And
sure.
he's one of these people that, we've talked to some drivers like this who have normal day jobs now, regular 8 to 5 jobs, where, racing is just kind of thing of the past. And people know, he was joking saying that he doesn't wear the shirt. We need to get him a shirt though that says I drove the Indy 500.
All right.
But he says I don't wear the shirt. Like, I don't tell people like, hey, I drove the Indy 500, but people are aware of it. Like, he'll bring it up in passing or whatever. But he just has a normal job now, so he don't get to talk about racing. So a lot of these guys like that love to, kind of talk about their past and kind of reminisce on it. And he
Well,
definitely has a lot, to be proud of. He may not have
sure.
had all the results that he wanted, but once again, he drove in several Indy 500s. He had tons of success in the series before IndyCar. And I think part of the issue was, there were some things that fell out of line with some of the bigger IndyCar teams that he was kind of in line to drive for, and things didn't really align his way. So that's part of the reason, I think, why, he may not have had the success he wanted. But
Yeah, he just, and I always say this, like, it's a lot smaller scale for me, right? But to go have a normal job after owning your own business for a long time, or being around something like auto racing, it doesn't sound like it would be tough, but it is tough, because you've lived your life a total different way, and that has been your life. Like, you woke up in the mornings thinking about it, and you went to bed late at night thinking about it, and it kind of becomes your identity. And it's just this weird thing as you go through life, if you have to transition. I imagine for someone like Alex, it's just tough. It has to be so hard.
yeah, I think Alex just does a really good job just representing, it being a race car driver. And I think it's misinterpreted by a lot of people. When people think race car driver, a lot of people probably think like, oh, wealthy, someone
Playboy,
who's,
you know.
playboy, flying on planes,
Mhm.
like Chris Hemsworth, James Hunt. Chris Hemsworth played James Hunt. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
James Hunt lifestyle. And that's just not how it is. He talks literally about being being in the IndyCar race in Las Vegas, which, he's walking around town and people know him and he's almost like the celebrity, and he can't even afford a sandwich. And that's just
Right.
something that a lot of people, I don't think, realize. Like, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes of racing that some drivers are driving for free. Some drivers are having to pay for their rides. Like, it's not all glamorous. And he just does a really good job with kind of representing
I agree.
what racing is all about. And don't get me wrong, there's drivers out there who make millions of I can't even talk. There's drivers out there who make millions and millions of dollars, but that's far in between for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is, and he just was able to, describe it, and man, just hats off to him for being so honest, though. I mean, I know a lot of guys that have go through stuff like that, and they just can never be honest about it. and that's no slight against them. I mean, that's their lives, but I really appreciate anybody who can be honest about it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
but yeah,
So,
so that's a great interview, and we're excited to present it.
and we recorded
Um,
this, I think it was before Christmas. So we have several that
oh
we're
yeah,
still trying to get to from December. So,
yeah. December was a great month for interviews. It's hard to get them all out, but yeah, we were very lucky to. Month of December, man, we got Christmas was definitely in the month of December for us. So
and we have, yeah, and we're working on some other interviews coming up that I've told you a couple names. So I made some connections at 24 Hours of Daytona. So really excited about a couple of those. And hopefully they pan out because they'll be pretty good, really good.
yeah, and hopefully the other thing we talked about that we hope to do, hopefully March or April, whatever we can get it all edited together, and we kind of have a week of interviews planned,
Oh yeah.
where we drop a show every day, and but it's a very specific driven set of interviews. So we're very excited about that. We're finalizing the interviews for that now, and man, we just trying to bring different perspectives and different ways of presenting these stories. So, and I've said this many times. Hats off to Aaron, who has to edit everything. He tracks down the people. He did go to Daytona as a fan, but he also was working down there, setting up interviews and getting contacts. So thanks, bud. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. And then yeah, we actually recorded it, a pretty big name IndyCar driver last. Oh, it was on Monday. It was right before I left for Daytona.
Yep.
And I actually got to talk to him at Daytona a little bit, so that was cool. So that one will be really good. And we were joking with him because he joined our Zoom meeting at 2 a.m. 2 days
Yeah, it was
before.
like some crazy time. Yeah, and he says he didn't do it, so somebody joined on behalf of him at some point. But no, good dude. I really enjoyed talking to him. Very
Fan
funny.
favorite for sure.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so before we get into Alex Lloyd, quick rundown of 24 Hours of Daytona. First off, how much of the race did you actually watch, Scott?
I watched probably 7 hours, 8 hours.
Hmm.
I can't, man. I just cannot do the overnight. Like,
Right. I know,
I
I know my
physically
buddy,
can't do it.
I know my buddy Jacob. I think he did the full because he was down the road at his buddy's house, and they were they his car. I saw his car when I got home today, and I was like, I bet he spent the night there, and they're watching the full 24 hours.
That's good though. Good for them, man.
Because I know he does,
Um,
he likes watching the full 24 hours, and yeah, I mean that's rough. I like to plan it where I can spend more time in Daytona, where I can actually stay at the track for the full 24 hours and actually like camp, but that gets really expensive. Like if you had a motorhome, like that'd be cool. Like I'd be all, and if you could have a motorhome and have it there in like the third and fourth turn of the oval, that would, I mean, I'd be down for that, but that's expensive, and I think that stuff books really quick.
oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I've never looked into it,
I know
obviously,
when
but
like
I'm sure
Jacob
it
went
does.
before, and he listens to most of our episodes. So if you're listening, Jacob, we appreciate it. But anyway, like when he went a couple years ago, I think they actually they stayed in the track full 24 hours, and they didn't have a tent or anything. Like they just like slept in
Oh,
the stands, I think, and just
oh
stayed up.
wow,
And that's
wow.
brutal, man. And I tell you right now, that would not have worked last night because that was brutal. Like no way.
Did you see the video of the spotters up there inside those tents that they
No,
had on top of the thing? So they had spotters standing in top of inside of these standing tents, so they could spot. They had clear on the front of them, so they could spot the race.
really.
So yes, I mean, because I can't imagine how freezing cold it would have been on top of those grandstands.
And I don't know if people are watching on YouTube right now. I have like lines on my face from like getting like windburn or whatever. So yeah, it was brutal. You would not have been, because my dad was done after about 7 o'clock. So
Yeah, he and I would have been, if I'd have been there. He and I'd been sitting in the car together, getting warm. That's for sure.
Oh, I'm sure.
We probably would have left you and went to Hooters across the street and then come back. It's probably what we would have
Wing
done.
House. Wing House is the spot.
Well,
There.
Wing House, whatever.
I don't know if there's Hooters around there.
I
Wing
thought there
House.
was a Hooters right by there.
Wing
Maybe
House is
not.
really good food though. But anyway, so Elio wins Daytona 2nd year in a row.
He's got a little magic there with Shank, doesn't he?
Yeah. So with Shank,
some magic
first year
there.
with Shank, him, Pagano, Tom Bloomquist, and Oliver Jarvis. So congratulations to them. Great to see. I mean, man, I guess I want to say it's all in the same year, but what a great year, couple years for Shank. I mean, Indy 500, then Daytona. I mean, it's looking good for that team. I mean, it's just amazing what that team has really overcome.
And I think he could, I mean, without speaking with Shank, I don't know him, but I would have to think that sports car racing is obviously, I would think, his first love, because that's where he really got involved in sport deep. So
I remember when he said he was going into IndyCar racing, a lot of people were, kind of looked at him kind of weird, like, that's not going to work. But obviously, he proved people wrong big time.
He's sharp. He's determined. He's sharp, and it sounds like, and we talked about this before, it sounds like it's a real family affair too. Like his wife sounds to be very involved in what they do, which is great. I mean, and I think that only makes it better.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So LMP2, Dragon Speed won. So that was a Pata Award, Colton Herta, Devlin De Francisco, and Eric Lux. So that was like an IndyCar power team kind of, minus Eric Lux. Right. I mean, 3 IndyCar drivers, so it was really cool to see them. That was a car we were talking about, really bright, like fluorescent colors.
Yeah, beautiful race car.
Oh, yeah. 90s colors, so I like it. LMP3, Riley Motorsports, Philippe Fraga, Gar Robinson, Kevin Burlow, and Michael Cooper. GTT Pro. This was actually the first Rolex win. Path Motorsports, Philippe Nasser, who actually tested IndyCar, I think, and he's done some Formula One testing, I believe. Matt Campbell, Matteo Jarmanet. Yeah, I'm not even going to try to pronounce some of these names. And then GTD, Wright Motorsports, Jan Halen, Ryan Hartwick, Richard Leeds, and Zachary Robicon.
How many cars is which will be, I guess, GTP starting next year, but how many cars does the top division have? Is it like 10, roughly 9 or 10?
I think so. LMP1, there's only like 5 or 6.
Well, I mean, there's the 2 Ganassi cars, Wayne Taylor. I mean, I think there's 7 or 8.
Right.
I would, if they could get another 5 cars in that division,
yeah,
I think that would be the perfect field. Like, I don't know why I don't know why I want more cars, because it was close racing, but I feel like if they had like just maybe another 5 cars in that division, along with the same level of cars all the way through, that it would be just unbelievable racing. I mean, which it already is, but I don't know why. There's something that's stuck in my head. Like they're just maybe 4 to 5 or 6 cars short in that upper tier to really put on their best show.
Right. Yeah, it's just like the LMP3 really adds a lot, I think. And we talk about this in the preview episode, tribute episode we did for Rolex with Pete Hallsmer and Mimo Gitley. Obviously, it's changed a little bit since they both have raced, especially since Pete raced. But it's the LMP3 really. I know Mimo was saying like LMP3 cars are a lot faster than the GT cars, but I saw a lot of GT cars passing at LMP3 cars, so they're pretty close. So it really adds a lot to it, and I can only imagine like how difficult it has to be as a driver, depending on what class you're in. Like when we talk about this a little bit, but like having to worry about either faster cars passing you or slower cars, or if you're in like LMP2 or LMP3, you're having to worry about faster cars and slower cars. So that's got to be tough. And I was paying more attention to that on the track. So that was really cool. But
Speaking of Mimo, he finished on the podium, right? In
yep,
his race?
I think he finished third.
I think so too. So
So
congratulations to
hopefully
him.
we'll see him. Hopefully this is a stepping stone to get him back into the big cars, and hopefully he'll be in the 24 Hours of Daytona next year at a minimum.
Right.
He's definitely
And
proved that he can still be successful
speaking of podium
or
finishes, we
competitive.
gotta talk about Robert Wickens
Yeah.
making his return competitive. I mean, he raced a little bit last year, but really back to the upper tier of the sport, or at least heading back to the upper tier of the sport. And he finished on the podium in his race. So congratulations to him. That is, like he said, he wanted to win, but he sure had tears he was holding back as he was coming as the race was ending. I can't imagine to just work so hard every day to overcome what he's overcome, to
Oh,
get back.
and
I
he's
just,
competitive as ever. I mean, he is quick
yeah,
still. So it'll be
yeah,
cool to
man.
see kind of where he goes from there. Yeah.
I agree. Congratulations to him, and man, I don't know if anybody could. I don't know if you could say enough about it. Really.
No, I agree. Well, I think we've talked enough. I will say, first off, thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you haven't already, like, subscribe on YouTube, check us out on Apple Podcast, Spotify. We definitely appreciate it.
Yeah.
Give a shout out.
Thank you to everyone who watches and subscribes, um, and I know I've said this many times. I'm a broken record, but thank you so much.
And I will give a shout out to one of our partners, racercollect.com. Patrick Patton. I actually saw him this morning after I landed from Daytona at Charlie Brown's. It was cool. That was actually the first time I physically met him in person. I mean, we've met via Zoom before, but physically meeting. So that was cool. It's kind of funny to see him there. But great guy. Definitely check out racercollect.com. He helped us get one of our guests that we interviewed last week. So big thanks to him. And
Well, he's just a really nice guy, and
yeah,
he's got a really good business concept, and
yep,
I just hope it goes for
great
him because
stuff on there as well.
I know he's putting in so much work on that. So, man, just best of luck to him.
It's good, it's good to see like other people that are passionate about something.
I agree. And
So
he is very passionate about it. And what I thought was kind of interesting is when we did our Chili Bowl preview, and he was speaking with one of our other guests, Doug Wright, and he and Doug really kind of had connection on a few things, um, and that's really cool to see. I mean, because then relationships. It's cool to see relationships being built, and just that I'm glad that you've introduced him to the show and to me, and I think he does. I think what he does is needed.
yeah.
Frankly, if you're gonna buy collectibles, I think what he provides is very needed.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think we've talked enough. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching and listening. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the Alex Lloyd interview.
Yeah. Everybody take care. Thank you.
Our guest today is a 2007 Indy Lights Champion. He also competed in 4 Indianapolis 500s. We were joined by Alex Lloyd. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
It's going great. How about you?
Great. It's going really good. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We definitely appreciate having you on. And as I was saying, like, I kind of grew up at the track, and getting to see you kind of work your way up through Indy Lights and get to drive in the Indy 500 was pretty cool. So it's really cool to talk to you.
No, it's nice to reminisce about those times as well, because like it was a while ago now. It's crazy to think how my last IndyCar race was 2011. So it's been more than a decade. So always nice to reminisce and think back on those years, which were a huge amount of fun.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And like me and Scott were just talking. I mean, you had a pretty good career. I mean, obviously, you were very dominant at Indy Lights. Talk a little bit about how you first got interested in racing. Like, what's your earliest memory of being involved with racing?
There's two, and I don't know what came first, but I number one, distinctly remember watching Ayrton Senna in F1. He's grown up back in England. I think it was the Senna Prost time, and just, you know, being my dad watching it and me just starting to get some sort of insight into racing. Nigel Mansell being being in the UK, being a huge thing. And, you know, and then my dad like taking me to a go-kart track, like an indoor, just, you know, same as like a K1 Speed or something that we have here, just an indoor go-kart track that was, you know, down the road from me on every Saturday. And I just started getting into it that way. And, you know, obviously from the American side, the Nigel Mansell moving over to IndyCar was like, that was the, you know, the big eye opener to me. But yeah, it was those early years of just, you know, just seeing it on TV, watching, enjoying it. My dad was into it, but he wasn't like a hardcore racing fan. But for whatever reason, it just captivated me. And, you know, from there, I just would beg and push him constantly, just like, hey, take me to a track, take me here. Can we get this? Can we get this old go-kart and take it there? And, you know, next thing you know, one thing leads to another and the ball starts rolling, and, you know, then it's hard to stop it once it's going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we talk to so many people and especially drivers who come through the open wheel racing, start in karting. You know, it's funny. You know, there's some who have these extensive racing backgrounds, and then there's the others who have no racing background. And kind of tell us what it was like, you know, when you really first started running competitively in karts, and kind of what was that time period like?
I mean, looking back now, it was one of the best periods of time that I can remember because, you know, and loads of drivers have said this. I mean, even Senna said it in his documentary, you know, the documentary Senna, you know, there was quotes of him saying, you know, like, it's the purest form of racing. And, you know, so many people say it, but I think it's true. You know, you look back now and you think there was no real pressure. It was, you know, you were just purely doing it for fun. There's no career. There's no really career aspirations to that level to that degree. You know, you were just there racing. And, you know, the great thing with go-karting is it's so close. It's hyper competitive. You know, you're inches wheel to wheel. You know, it was just that sort of first sense of like, wow, this is fun. And, you know, again, I look back now at like some of the people I was competing against in those early years of, you know, go-karts, and it's, you know, it's your Lewis Hamiltons, it's Mike Conway, you know, Oliver Jarvis, who's won Le Mans, like, you know, and Paul DeRista, who now, you know, raced F1, now commentated, just, you know, a sea of people that are, you know, have had success on both sides of the pond. And yeah, it was just, you know, like, it was just fun, just a lot of, you know, parents hanging out and having a few drinks in the motorhomes after the races, the kids, you know, playing rollerblading or skateboarding or whatever, you know, whatever it was we could when we put the races down, and we were just traveling weekend after weekend. And yeah, like, I look back now, I think what an amazing time. I guess it's a bit like when people, you know, look back on school in later life, and right. At the time you're like, oh, this is stressful, there's a lot going on. When you look back at later life and you're like, wow, that was like the best period of life. Like, right. I had no real responsibilities. I just went and had fun. And that was what go-karting was like. It's, you know, just pure fun, pure enjoyment before the real stress of like, okay, I need to make this a career and I've got to get to the next step. Didn't really think about it back then.
How long did it take you to realize that, hey man, I really got a talent for this? And that coupled with, you know, obviously you were talking about Mike Conway, great race car driver. Obviously everyone knows about Lewis Hamilton. So when you were competing against him when you were a kid and you're having success, and you're having what I assume success against them, how could you kind of see your future starting to develop at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when it really happened. Like, I remember very clearly in like my first year or two, and I remember my dad saying like, there was somehow it came up about like, you know, you'll win a race. And I was just new rookie, just, you know, just having a little bit of fun on the weekends. And I remember distinctly the first year or two feeling like, wait, what? I'll win a race? Like, I don't think so. Like, that doesn't seem to be a thing. So definitely the beginning, it was just, you know, I had no idea I had any talent. It wasn't like I just jumped in and was like, oh, I'm winning races. Like, it was just, you know, I was driving around like everybody else. I guess maybe when I was about 10, which was like a couple of years in, like second or third year in, just suddenly things started to click. I think I finished third in one of the British Championship rounds. Obviously, like, this is again competing against Lewis Hamilton and like Ben Hanley, who I know has raced a few Indy 500s, but has had a lot of success in Europe, and again, a lot of different drivers like that. Obviously, at the time, you don't know who these people are. There's no indication that Lewis Hamilton is going to go on to be a 7-time world champion, and you're just racing with these people. But I think it was about at the age 10 or 11. I think age 11, I finished fourth in the British Championship, and I was like, okay, like, there's something here. But it probably took until I was maybe a couple of years later, the junior Intercontinental A class out in Europe, and I remember it took me a while to get that first win, and there was I'd been close, and there was just one weekend where it was pouring with rain. We had the 3 heats and then the final. And in the heats, they put you stagger the grid position. It's like you'll start the front one race, the back, the middle, they'll take the average, and then you'll see where you start for the final. And I won every heat by, half a lap, and then, won the final. And I think that was like that first time where it was like, I mean, I can to this day remember that I don't know if I've had a feeling like that after a race, that sort of first victory and the first sort of feeling of, okay, there's something really clicked here. It's not like I was doing well, but then something happened after that first victory. And then it was sort of like off to the races. It was like, okay, confidence was up, everything was good. So I would say it wasn't too long after that I started having like really serious thoughts that like, okay, this will be my career. Like, I'm going to make it, all the way up. Naively at the time, if I look back, I think it was, it was in a period of time, again, with me, there was Jenson Button in the UK, Dan Weldon. Dan had obviously, come over and was doing great in America. Jenson Button at like a very young age was in Formula One. And I was naively like, okay, that's just how it's going to work. Like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to win this. I'm going to win that. And then I'll be promoted up here at a young age. Naturally, it doesn't happen like that at all. You suddenly then the reality hits of how hard it is to try and make it. But yeah, I'd say probably about age 14, 15, my confidence was pretty high at that point that like, okay, there's talent here, and I'll find a way up. At that age, I was just naive to the budget requirements that are needed in racing. I think my dad had shielded me a little bit from like the actual, challenges that comes with moving up the ranks. But yeah, I was sort of all, at that point, fully committed. That was the only thing on my mind, was my career will be as a driver.
Did you have any like goal at that point? Like, was it a race in Formula One, or was it a race in IndyCar, or did you not really think about kind of where you wanted to race at that point?
I did. Honestly, I kind of thought both. My original aim was like, I'd love to race in Formula One and I'd love to race in IndyCar. And a lot of that came from Nigel Mansell. I just thought it was so cool, and vice versa with like Montoya and stuff. I just thought it was so cool when you see drivers in different disciplines. Yeah. And, naturally the 500 had this allure, as it does for everybody, because, you look at the F1 scene and yes, it's huge, and now becoming increasingly huge even in America, with Netflix and all this good stuff. But there is, yes, there's Monaco, flagship event, but there's nothing to the level of where you have this just one standout race that you win this race or do well in that race, and it can completely change your career. And not just that, it's just a different feeling, like as we all know, like just a different feeling, that event, to anything else you can experience. You don't have that anywhere really in Europe, unless you're a sports car racer and you go to Le Mans. So I think for me, there was always a pull towards America, partly because of the cars, the racing, the 500. I think also just culturally too. Like I don't know, I always just liked coming over here and thought like this would be a great place to live and spend time and race. So I think I'd always had these sort of objectives of both. It became pretty clear that F1 was a very hard place to get to unless you have some big budgets. At the time when I came to America, so just before the economy crashed, like there were opportunities. So America was always, to me, sort of like, it sounds cliche, but like the land of opportunity. Europe was this really slim, narrow tunnel that was very difficult to see any light there, unless you had a big, wealthy benefactor that's paying for all your racing. And this was pre the F1 teams picking up drivers. I mean, it was happening on a very small scale, But like now, a lot of these younger drivers are picked up by teams. I mean, they still have to have huge budgets, but I think the recruiting for drivers is happening at a younger age now. With me, it's like you had to get to that point with all that budget behind you, and Europe was clearly a difficult place for that. So my eyes were definitely set on America from a pretty early age, that I'd like to be there at some point.
You tested a Formula One car, right? I think 2004.
Yeah. So there was an award that we have in the UK called the Young Driver of the Year Award. It was sponsored by Autosport, the magazine, and McLaren. And each year they take 6 or 7 British young drivers get selected. They go up against each other in like a 2 or 3 day shootout. The winner of that gets some funding, which is very helpful. A very nice watch, I remember that, and you get a test in a McLaren. So that was obviously that part. The budget was obviously huge for me. I didn't, especially that year, I didn't have any other budget, so that was crucial for me getting some seat time the next year. But then you had the opportunity to test in McLaren a year later. So I got to do that, very similar to what we've just seen at McLaren yesterday with Pato going,
right,
getting his run. A very similar sort of situation. And in fact, my first test with McLaren, it was 3 of us out there. So it was Lewis's very first time in a McLaren in a Formula One car, myself, and this guy called Jamie Green, who raced DTM for many years. And the 3 of us had our sort of first test on that same day, same car in Silverstone.
Well, that had to be quite the experience to, get to obviously drive the fastest car. I mean, you can drive, on a road course at least. So I'm sure that was a really cool experience.
It was mind blowing, and I was lucky because it was dry. It was in December at Silverstone. Usually it's wet, even if it's not raining that day. It's been so cold that the ground is going to be wet from the day before. It's never going to dry out, and I really wanted to experience it in the dry and get the full feel for it. At that point, I thought I was pretty well prepared. I've been driving Formula 3000. And those cars at that time, this was before GP2 or anything, they were the quickest car that you could drive outside of in the ladder system in Europe, outside of going into Formula One. So I'm like, well, there is no extra step there in terms of car performance. So it's going to be a lot, but it's going to be manageable. And honestly, those first few laps, I was just, it was like, I don't actually know how humans can do this. Like, the speed was so intense. Like, there was no linear progression. Like, normally you put your foot on the gas and you feel that speed go up. It was just a light switch. It was like, okay, I'm doing 60 mile an hour. Okay, now I'm doing 200. And it just felt like you couldn't. It was just absolutely insanity. After a few laps, your brain adjusts to the speed, and and then you're like, okay, now I can actually focus on what I'm doing. But the first few laps were just mind blowing. And of course, this was back in the day when those cars were like in 2004. I mean, they still had sort of the 1,000 horsepower. They were really, really quick machines. And then obviously they slowed them down a bit. And as happens, they've started to get a little faster as technology improves. But they're still some of the quickest cars out there. So it was cool to jump into it in the V10 or whatever it was before the hybrid era came in, and you had that amazing sound and all.
That sound.
At the time you don't take it for granted, but you didn't know that was going to go. Now when I see video clips of that day, it's like, okay, that was cool. That was really cool to experience that.
They were testing the older Ferraris at IMS in the summer. And I remember getting woken up on a Sunday and just hearing that V10 or whatever sound, and it's nothing like it.
That was how I for a while I lived it a bit like what you do with Speedway, but compared to Silverstone, I lived a mile away from Silverstone. Back in the day when the F1 teams just could test whenever they want, it was just open. So, I was maybe 18, 19 years old, and same thing. You just wake up, you just hear the engines revving, and then the cars would go out, and you'd be like, oh, F1 must be testing today, and you could just drive down there and go take a look. But that's the sound as an alarm clock was, that was pretty special.
you know, and I'm sure at that point in your life, you thought, this is where I'm going to be. You know, obviously it's all lining up for me. This is exactly where I'm going to be. Um, Kind of take us through when you started realizing, man, it may not happen for me in Formula One, and I got to start setting my sights somewhere else, which obviously led you to America.
Yeah, I think so. I remember it distinctly. So after the year that I won the that auto sport award, I think I finished second in the championship in Formula Renault. It was Lewis won the championship. I was second. I think Mike Conway third or fourth. Anyway, we were in that sort of group. I got that award, got some funding to compete a part year in the European Formula 3000, won some races, had a bit of bad luck with some breakdowns, but won races and got a call from Red Bull saying like, hey, like Dr. Helmut Marko there, like, hey, we might fund you in GP2 next year, the equivalent of Formula 2 now. So at that point, I knew that was like the defining moment, because I'm like, I don't have any funding and I have no real option. And I know I was sort of concerned then, because, you know, Red Bull had a bunch of drivers. They weren't, it was very unsure whether they were going to take anybody else on. That didn't play out. It didn't happen. And I think at that point, I was pretty panicked in terms of, I don't know what I'm going to do. I remember reaching out to a bunch of sports car teams. I was just like, reaching out to, randomly cold emailing folks in the Japanese, like the Formula Nippon class there, like they probably, I don't even know if they could read English. Like I was just trying anything I could to find something. So I was really concerned at that point. I was like, how am I going to take it to the next step? And I don't remember how it happened. I think it was, so there's Roger Bailey on the Indy Lights side of things, or the Pro Series at the time. Somehow I'd got connected to him, and he was like, hey, there are teams out here in the Indy Lights that you should speak to. And, they might not, the budget side might not be an issue. So, why don't I put you in touch with a few people? And I got put in touch with Gary Peterson at AFS, and he was, like, hey, why don't you, if you want to pay for a race, you can come out, I'll put you in the car, you got to pay for it. But if you do well, there might be something that we could do. So that was like the first little glimmer of hope of like, okay, we still had to pay for the race, and we didn't have any, like literally no budget. My dad, everything that he'd poured into racing, it was gone. So our only option was, okay, well, we can refinance the house. We can get out, I think it was like $50,000 or something like that. That was enough to pay for one weekend in St. Petersburg in 2006 with AFS Racing. And yeah, it was a sort of do or die. Like, okay, we'll go there. If it goes well, Gary Peterson says he will fund the rest of the year. So yeah, that was like a full pressure weekend, and it did go well. I think we ended up on the podium. I think I can't remember, we had an issue in race one, but so we had to come from a little bit further back on the grid and ended up on the podium, and was like, okay, I think it was between myself and Rafael Matos, who was like the two quickest people. And that led to a full-time year, which then led into sort of a free drive with Sam Schmidt in the Indy Lights series. So that was like the turning point, because it was, it was looking pretty grim with no funding, like Europe was like, hey, it doesn't matter what you've achieved. If you don't have funding, we cannot put you in a car, which is kind of how it is today, to be honest, over here in America. But at that point, there were still these few people that were like, like Gary was paying for it all himself. And he's like, if you're good and you can win races for me, like, I'll fund this. So it was just the right time, because then obviously the economy crashed and everything sort of changed a little bit since then. But yeah, it gave me that one shot, which worked out. And that led me to 2 great years in Indy Lights, which obviously then was the stepping stone into IndyCar.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously the 2007 season, you just absolutely dominated. I mean, you won the first 5 races and you won 3 other races. And actually at the time I was looking at this, it was a record, and I think it's beaten now by Kyle Kirkwood, but you had the most consecutive wins during the season, which was 5 in a row, and then 8 in a season, which was a record as well. And there was one more. What was the other one? There was another 5 wins in a season, 10 career and most points scored Yeah, most points scored in a series.
Yeah, and I think that year too, at that point, I was the only person to have ever won on the road course and oval Indy, which was cool, which, has been now. I think there are obviously other people that have done that, but that was,
right.
I sort of got that, which was a cool thing. So yeah, that was like the season where everything came to that. I felt like that was like the culmination of like everything that had happened to that point, because I'd never really had much of a budget to play with. I'd never been in what would be considered the top car. So like in, the year I finished second in Formula Renault, I was in a car that, was not going to, it wasn't the top team. It was a, sort of a decent team, but, you're not with the team that's won the championship X number of years in a row. And, and it was always like, do the best with what I've got. And then, an AFS in the limited year that I did in 2006 in Indy Lights. I mean, I think was it 1 win, 2 wins in that year. I think we did 6 or 8 races, something like that. But again, like AFS was not the team to beat at that point. It was very clearly Sam Schmidt, and it was very clearly that number 7 Lucas Oil car was the car that every year the guy goes into that car, they win the championship, and like that's the thing. So for me, when I moved into that series, that seat, it was very clear that like you have to win, and there are no excuses. Like if I don't win, that's on me. Like I have the best car, I have the best team, I have everything at my disposal. I'm also not paying for the drive. In fact, I was even being paid a little bit of money, which was sort of unheard of in an Indy Lights side. Right. So it was, it was like, okay, like you deliver. And the flip side of that too was that, I had all that confidence that I had the best people around me, and and it was one of those years that for the most part couldn't have gone any better. I mean, there are obviously always times and places like I can think to, a few different reliability issues or things that we had that cost us a couple of wins. But yeah, I mean, we won 50% of the races that year. I think we locked up the championship with a few races to go. So it was a really like as fun a year as you can have, because yes, there was pressure, but because of how much of a lead we built in the championship so early, you could really just enjoy it. And we just had a great car, whether it was oval, road course. Actually the road course we did have to improve a little bit, but oval we had a great car. And yeah, it was, it was just one of those years where just everything came together. It made me sort of a hot commodity in the, in the IndyCar space. Lots of team owners reaching out, and, it was that sort of period of time where to me, I was like, okay, I'm not in IndyCar yet. I haven't hit that sort of big time, but I've got everything here. Like to me at that point, I'm like, I feel like a good career is going to happen from this point. Like I felt like every box had been checked, everything was going on that right way. The conversations I was having, and yeah, I felt like I'd sort of overcome the challenges of getting there. Again, maybe in retrospect, somewhat naively, because, there was a lot of things that happened after that. But at that moment in time, I was like, okay, like that's everything I can do. I've proven myself. At the end of that season, I got Ganassi asked me to do. They used to have the I don't know what they used to call it, but it was like a split test day where if you took a junior driver, you'd be granted X number of test days a year, and you had to just give them a couple of hours of running basically, and then the regular driver could take over. So I went to Sebring, drove Ganassi's Indy car with Scott Dixon, and I came away from that day, being, I think it was maybe like a tenth or two quicker than he had been. And it was like, then Ganassi had said like, oh, come and do our Grand Am at the time sports car race, on the Sonoma weekend. So I was kind of jumping in with them, and it was that period of time where it was like everything's falling into place. Like nothing could be better. Like I said, somewhat naively, because then it all, it never works out. Or in this case it didn't. But yeah, 2007 was that year where everything fell into place.
Did they have the Road to Indy scholarship back then?
No, sadly not. No, there was nothing. I think winning the championship, at least from like a prize money or funding perspective. I mean, there probably was prize money, but it all rooted back to the team because they were obviously paying for the seat. But yeah, there was no sort of scholarship that helped ladder you up into anything. It was, yeah, you sort of on your own from that perspective.
We've we've spent a little time, Aaron and I, here recently. We went to the Chris Griffiths test at the Speedway, and we were trying to get on some of the younger drivers. We had Jack Miller's son do an interview last night, which we'll release. We've had Jagger Jones on the show, which is PJ Jones's son, Parnelli's grandson. He's running USF 2000 this year. And there's a few others we're going to have on. And it's really interesting to see these young guys as they're at that stepping stone in the sport. And, you can hear them kind of saying the same things like you're saying, it's all, at that point, it's still all all your dreams and hopes are still in front of you.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to hear him talk. It's interesting to hear you talk about it in retrospect. And so, I mean, you obviously proved yourself, and then you got some chances in IndyCar. Did that deal start off the way you wanted it to, or was it ever quite like you wanted it to?
No, so I basically I had a few different opportunities. I think I remember Ray Hall coming to me. I think it was Jeff Simmons was driving at the time, and like that car was potentially up for grabs. I had John Barnes at Panther had come to me. Maybe it was Vitor's car. I forget who was in that car at the time, but like there was potentially, or maybe it was Andretti for Dario's car. That was, basically they said, we want you in that car, which I was like, perfect. And then I had Ganassi who was saying like, hey, we don't have a full-time car, but we know Dan Weldon is, at this point, they were saying Dan's going to go to NASCAR. Like that was sort of where his head was at. And we want to sort of groom you and you be the next guy, take over Dan's car and you're sort of off. The Andretti thing ended up not being able to happen just because Hideki Muto came in with a fair bit of Honda funding, and they basically were like, hey, like, we got to take the funding on this one. So that led me with, potentially some smaller teams or Ganassi. And it's naturally very, when it's Ganassi, it's like, okay, like that's a big team. There's opportunities in some of the sports car stuff. It was like, clearly I need to go that route. And, I can take a year of, being in the 500, maybe, competing in the Daytona 24 Hours and a few other bits and pieces, getting some testing in, and then I'll be really ready for 2009. That was sort of what I promised. I think it was like a 4-year contract that I'd signed. And first year of my first, it was definitely a little bit up and down. The sort of first year, I didn't get much time in the car, but whenever I did get time in the car outside of the 500 in 2008, which was a little bit of a challenge after a crash that we had, but the testing that I did in the actual Ganassi car, because that was a loaned out I was loaned out to Ray Hall, but the testing in the Ganassi car, again, like alongside, their top drivers, we were there, we were competitive. I thought that, okay, at some point, like this is going to happen. The big challenge that I had was, Dan did indeed leave at the end of that year. I think he went to Panther, and there was my seat. But that was the year that Dario had gone to NASCAR with Ganassi, and he basically, he'd had a crash. I think he'd like hurt his ankle or something like that. And, and he didn't really want to do NASCAR, but he had a long-term contract with Ganassi, and they were either going to have to buy him out or provide him with some seat somewhere else. And yeah, really what ended up happening just by pure bad luck is, for me was, Dario was like, okay, I'll, instead of paying me out, I'll come back to IndyCar and I'll jump in, in the target car, which all of a sudden was like, okay, Alex, like this, this was your car. This was sort of your stepping stone into the big leagues, in a championship winning material. We're going to have to try and, like, Dario's now going to come in. We've got to put him in. And now we're going to try and figure something out with you, and we're going to try and find some funding. And that was like that first element of things that, this isn't going to be as easy. It hasn't gone to plan. Like that wasn't what I was promised. It wasn't what was supposed to happen. And, but they, the team, I understood it. Like I understood the situation they're in. But it was yeah, it was frustrating. It was challenging. You know, we tried to find some funding. We got some races, obviously, with Her Energy and stuff like that. But that was sort of the beginning of, you know, what was just, to me, just felt like, you know, you had all these sort of perfect cards, you know, handed to you, like you're in this prime situation, and just, you know, external factors of just bad luck, you know, the economy, you know, having a complete crash where sponsors are, you know, teams don't have a whole bunch of funding, you know, at their disposal. You know, and you've just got situations with Dario and things like that have just, you know, eliminated the drive that you were sort of promised, that's now sort of on the back foot. And, you know, I'm out of the racing scene. I'm not racing that much. Like, you know, it was sort of the start of situations. I mean, again, we can go into this, but I had, you know, the Her Energy sponsor, which we were going to take to Newman Haas. We'd signed on, those guys defaulted on it. And it was just a wave of what could have been that just kept getting stripped away, that, you know, that ended up putting me in a position where I wasn't really able to, I mean, I felt like I just never got a crack at IndyCar in a environment where I could actually sort of do what I'd done in Indy Lights and sort of, you know, transfer that. So yeah, again, it's like when you look back on hindsight, it's like, you know, you think everything's lining up, and, you know, just with all of this, you never know. And I think for me, when I look back, I just think there were so many unlucky moments. I don't know if there were any decisions I made that I could have done differently that would have, you know, I think I'd probably have done the same thing, but it just, you know, the circumstance meant that, you know, it never really ended up where I felt like I should have done.
Yeah, you talk about checking boxes. Ganassi Racing, check. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that's absolutely a no-brainer.
No, I mean, you have, you know, yes, it was a, you know, I think to a degree a risk to not race and to know you're not going to race much the next year. But when Chip Ganassi says, like, you know, like, here's a 4-year contract, you know, you are my guy for the number 9, I think it's number 10 car when Dan leaves. You know, just race a little bit this year. We'll groom you. We'll give you a chance to learn off, you know, off Dixon, off Dan, and then we're going to put you in, and then you go for championships. I mean, you say, yes, okay, I'm in. The only exception to that would have been if the Andretti seat had become available, because that would have been, you know, Dario's seat in a full-time season in one of the best teams. Like, okay, that would have been a different option. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, it's, you know, it's Penske and it's Ganassi. And, you know, when Chip says that, hey, we have all this and we'll you know, commit to your development, you jump right in. But, you know, as I said, the challenge is that things can happen, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault. It's just, you know, sometimes.
This is the part of auto racing that's, I think, it's the toughest, because unlike stick and ball sports, if you excel at your position, and not only if you excel, I mean, there's exceptions of great players who have a lot of personal off the field troubles, but let's just say apples to apples, and you're excelling at your position. Well, naturally they take that player, and everybody tries to figure out how to fit him in because he excels. Or unfortunately, as in auto racing, you know, I mean, I'm sure in your position you're thinking, I've got the skills, you know, I've proven I can do this. And it's just got to be so frustrating, when everything you're doing looks right on paper and you're doing everything right and it just isn't going your way.
It is. It's one of those sports that, you know, it isn't just down to you. You know, there are other elements in there. There's luck, there's timing, there's financials, but, you know, there's also just equipment, and that's like a big thing. And that was, you know, like for me, it was never more evident than in 2010 when I, you know, managed to, you know, scrounge a last minute deal with Dale Coyne, which, you know, again, sort of on paper could have, you know, could have been a good thing, but again, timing wise, I think, you know, Justin had just left, and the engineer that Justin Wilson had been working with, they'd left. So really, just before the season, like I joined, there was no engineering, there was nobody. We literally didn't have an engineer for the entire season. So we were just trying to, like, an assistant engineer was trying to step up, and it was, you know, a situation where on the road courses, at least, we actually did really well on the ovals. Just yeah, we just happened to have somebody there that really understood ovals, and we did really well on those. I think punched above our weight at the time. But the road courses, it was just, it was horrible. We were so slow. But because of being like a young new driver, it's like you have this balance of like, I know I can do this. Like I'm watching, drivers that I've competed with, that I've been against in the same car, and like I can't get close. There's something wrong. But when you're the new driver, it's very difficult to, for people to believe, well, maybe this person just doesn't transition to that car, and maybe this isn't right for them. And you maybe start to even believe that a little bit yourself. Like, well, is it me? Like, am I just, like not adapting to the car? What is it? Like in that case, the big sort of eye opener for me was the next year when Bourdais did the road courses in my car. I did the ovals, he did the road courses. And those first few races, he was in exactly the same position I was, and was like, this is terrible. I mean, we brought in some engineers that year, so like they sort of started raising their game like throughout the year, and into the following years, they sort of invested a little bit more heavily. But again, just like a prime example of, luck not being on your side, that, you just happen to be in the car when there aren't sort of, an engineering team to sort of help develop it. And yeah, like you just feel like your hands are totally tied in that, like, yeah, what can I do to stand out? How can I show that, like, I know I have the talent, but I'm just not in an environment where it's coming across. And then again, like I said, you then deal with self-doubt and things like that. And, it's just a really weird, difficult career. And again, like when things are going right, and if you have the cards line up in your favor, maybe you don't always experience that. But in my case, yeah, there was just a lot of, at least in the IndyCar side, there was a lot of things that didn't go in my favor. And yeah, you experience a lot of those frustrating moments. And I think more than anything after the fact, the last 10 years or so, trying to rationalize that now has actually been a lot harder than in the moment. In the moment, you're like, okay, well, maybe there'll be something else. I'll fight, like this is gonna, it'll all work its way out. But then when you look back 5 years later after your last race, and you're like, you still have that sort of anguish of, I know there was more to give. Like, I know that, yes, you could say, okay, you made it to IndyCar, you raced X number of races in IndyCar, you finished fourth, arguably third, crossed the line third in the 500. It got, pushed back down to fourth, I think, due to some politics and stuff after the race. But like, regardless, like you were there, you were, like having a result as fourth in the Indy 500, like, you competed in the 500 4 times. Like, what more do you really want? Like, that's great. But you look back of all those sort of moments, and, it's, you just know that you were able to give more, and you were so close in some of these occasions, like the Ganassi thing, like just a few different things, could have been very different. You look at Dixon driving today, and a lot of these guys that are still there, you're like, just, one little thing here or there. And that's the beauty of what ifs in life. And while whether it's racing, other careers, just life in general, like, I mean, we all face that type of thing where you have these sort of crossroads or these little incidents that happen that change the trajectory slightly. So while I'm happy that I got a good run at it and got some good results out of it, you spend 10 years trying to not, eat yourself up inside about all those little moments that, that could have made it very different.
Yeah, and you're even in a stranger position, I think, because, and I hope this doesn't come across wrong, you race against someone as a child, as a kid, through teens, who's now considered maybe one of the world's best race car drivers ever. And I'm sure you're extremely competitive. I mean, you have to be. And I would think that'd be very hard to look at all that success and think, man, and I'm not trying to say jealousy. I mean, just as a competitive person, I think that would be very hard to look at that and go, man, I've beaten that guy.
Yeah. No, it
You
is. Yeah, Lou, I mean, not so much now, but yeah, there's definitely a period of time where you're like, and not just Lewis, but other folks that have been in F1. Sure. And it's like, I've been their teammates, or I've driven in the same car on the same day, literally same car, side by side, same team. whether it be in testing, and things like that. It's like, I know where I stand against those people. And again, like back to the, to the Ganassi days of like sharing the car with, with their top drivers on the same day, things like that, total same, apples to apples. And you can say, okay, like I know, where where I should be. And like, it's those types of things that make it, they do make it sort of extra challenging when, if you end up in a situation, like I did, where it sort of felt like it ended prematurely. Right. But, again, like it's easy to get, I think that especially those first, and really honestly, like what I think a lot of, like, it really doesn't exist anywhere in terms of like the conversation as like what does happen, whether it's as a driver, when you turn off the lights, whenever that may be, for whatever reason it may be, and then you move on into your regular career. We start to hear a little bit more of like folks in the Olympics or maybe the NFL. You start to hear a little bit of those stories of like former sports people that then moved on, and like just sort of that challenge of, identity. If you grow up in like, that's, for me, since I was age 8, that was my identity. I was Alex Lloyd, the racing driver. And then when that turns off, like, you try and figure out like, well, what do I do now? And you see these other guys that are out there, doing it in Lewis's case at the highest level, earning God knows how much, how many millions of dollars, and being like the most successful driver. And there's a little bit where you say, God, like I know I could have, I could be doing that, but through circumstance, but like that's, again, like anything in life, you can live in those what ifs, which is not a great place to be. Or I can look at it and say, like there was a hell of a run. There was a experienced a Formula One car, experience, finished 5th in the Daytona 24 hours. Yes, it's not a win, but like, hey, we were up there. We were fighting, been up there and fighting in the, in the 500, raced numerous different races against different teammates, and, and ultimately made it to the top level. So it's like, I can always sort of say that, like, okay, you got to, yes, in the top level, it didn't work out quite the way you hoped, but, you were there. You never, there's so many drivers I can think of that deserved a crack at the top level that just never got it through financing running out, or again, just other circumstances. So, I sort of pretty quickly in those first few years managed to, get rid of any of that sort of, I don't know what the feeling is, because it's not a jealousy thing. It's more of just a being down about luck, circumstance. Right. So yeah, like this thing
that's tangible, but you can't grab it.
Yeah, exactly. And for so long, like again, at the end of 2007, I felt like I had my hands on it, and like I felt like I'd already grabbed it. It's like, it's like, cashing in a check that you haven't quite got yet. It's like you're almost mentally in your mind doing that, but it hasn't actually happened. And that was, I think, a little bit, what ended up happening to me is I took my contract for granted, that I'm being told I'm in that car. That's going to happen. And like, brilliant, because when I get in that car, like I've tested that car, like I know I can do the job, like great. The similar thing happened when we signed with Newman Haas. I think we did the last race in 2009 with Newman Haas. We had a really good weekend. I think we qualified 5th, finished 8th. Our race car wasn't amazing, but again, we were, Rahal was in the same team, and we sort of outperformed the other side of the team in qualifying and race. And I thought, okay, great, like Newman Haas, that's a great team. Going from Ganassi to Newman Haas, like we're going to have opportunities. And then that fell through last minute too. So for a while I did think that like I was grasping onto the trophy, so to speak. And then, then it gets sort of ripped out. And that's, again, like looking back, we talked about before, like in hindsight being that thing where, there's just so many unpredictable things. And that is the challenge with racing. It's also sort of, the beauty of racing, and that like, just again, like I think back to my experiences, just so many different things happen that it sort of very well prepares you for future life, because you deal with all sorts of different adversity. Like it's just, that's the way it all rolls. And what is meant to be is meant to be. I mean, for a number of years, I had to sort of rely on reminding myself of some of the tragic things that happened, and with Dan's accidents, and then Justin Wilson, and like, again, who knows what life or fate is, it sort of drives you, like, who knows what would have happened to me if I hadn't, if I had been, you just never know. So
Right.
I've got to that point where it's like, that was what was meant to be. We got out of it what we could, had an amazing career, had a great time doing it, and then move on and figure out the next chapter.
Do you keep a lot of your, do you have a lot of your trophies in that to this day, or is that maybe something you just kind of put away?
No, I do. I don't actually have much on display. Although I'd like to, but no, I'll bring out some of the pictures. I usually have a couple of helmets up and about here and there. Just it's nice to again, it's been more than 10 years now. I'll be going on 11 years. So it's since the last race. So it's nice to remind yourself of like those times, because it's very easy to forget. Like, in my case, I moved out of Indiana over to California, start working in a real job, doing sat at a desk on a computer all the time, and sort of building a totally different career. And it's very easy to forget all that side of things. And yeah, you don't want to forget it. It's it was an amazing period. So, while maybe for a little bit of time, it's easier just to sort of tuck it away and not think about it. Like, now I'm at that point where, like, I want to, again, like with this conversation, it's really nice just to sort of reminisce about, those old times. And, like, I miss the racing world. At the same point, I remember when I was in it the last few years, and I was thinking, God, it would be amazing to, like, know what my next step in my career is, because how scary it was to think at some point racing is going to end, and I'm going to have no idea what I'm going to do to feed the family and everything like that. So, you also knew that transition was going to happen, and it was, so it's lots of weird mixed emotions of all of it. But yeah, like, I feel like it all happened the way it was supposed to happen.
Yeah, I kind of owned race cars with my brother and stuff, like midget sprint car type stuff, and or not sprint cars, but open wheel type stuff. And there is this thing that when you're done, it really is a strange time, even at my level. I never had the success that you guys had, but and you got to remind yourself that you're really 0.01 of everybody who's ever lived, because most people never get the opportunity to even come close to living their dreams.
Yeah.
And you have to remind yourself of that. At least I've had to over the years, and it is a funny thing. You look back, on one hand, you're kind of disappointed it's all over. Then you got to realize that we kind of lived like kings and princes. I mean, you had this really amazing life, and it is. I mean, obviously, I don't know what it's like to be in your position, but I have a small idea.
Yeah, no, exactly. I tell you what, one of the most interesting things where it really clicked with me as to, that, like, it's not just me sort of anguishing over a career ending and moving into real life, was they had the Brickyard Invitational, at Indy. It was a,
pro-am.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The pro-am with, vintage muscle cars, bring in 33 former IndyCar drivers, pair them with amateurs, and we go race. It was, just go have fun in those cars.
I didn't realize you did that.
Yeah, I did that for the first 3 years, maybe. I think I only missed, maybe it was just 1 year, and then obviously they haven't done it for a couple of years. So, we'd have, I just remember vividly a press conference that we'd have all the time, and the 33 drivers would come talk. And you'd hear it like one by one through, Donald Davidson, his great historian, was sort of talking one by one through all the drivers and just getting their sort of feelings. And the response from everybody, from Max Papis, from all these different drivers of various different ages and generations. And the overwhelming thing was, like, it's so nice to remind myself of, like, who I am, who I was. Or to, like, show my kids who, maybe depending on, on the person, like maybe their kids never saw them race, never knew who like dad was. So there was like this amazing, just group of people, again, all sorts of different decades. I wasn't that far removed from racing at the time, but there were some of these folks that have been removed for 20, 30 years.
Like Dick Simon and people like that.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody talking about like, this is an opportunity for me to just sort of relive who I used to be. And that was the first time to me where I was like, oh, wow, like this is this common theme across all drivers when they stop. And you have like this, again, like this, everything that you've built your whole life around since you were a kid. And then, suddenly it's over. And, in later years, I've realized that that's sort of across sports in general. My girlfriend actually is a two-time Olympian, and she retired in 2016 after the Rio Olympics. And, we both talk about exactly the same types of things of like when that ends. And there's actually a great documentary, it's an HBO one, that The Weight of Gold, and helps is it. And like I started to see like more of that around, and that was like, oh wow, like like that's what it is. Like that's what all these drivers and all these other sports folk are feeling and dealing with. Again, it wasn't something that was really talked about, and I didn't click until, as I said, that Brickyard Invitational, and I realized that, hey, Max Papis is feeling the same way. This person is, that person is, and it's like, oh wow, okay, that makes perfect sense. We've had this. Your personality is sort of, and who you are is intrinsically tied to a sport, and then like disconnecting that is it is definitely a little bit of a challenge. But it's a common thing that every driver has and will face, whether they're massively successful or and have raced at the highest level for decades and decades, or in some cases maybe they never even made it to the highest level, but like it's still that same type of thing, different experience. But at some point the music stops, and you go on with the non-racing side of life. Maybe you can be lucky and you can figure out something within racing and sort of keep that passion going. In my case, it required sort of a full shift away from racing to take those next steps. But it's a strange business.
When you look at the number of people that compete in the 500, I mean, it's like 800 people like all time. And so you're probably dealing with maybe 200, 300 people that are alive now. So that's a very small number. I mean, just think about all the kids who grow up to say they're going to race in the Indy 500 someday. So it's definitely a very elite group of people.
It is. And it's one of those things that sometimes you have to just pinch yourself about. And I do wish that the Speedway would do a better job at sort of the Indy 500 alumni. Like I know you'll get sort of an opportunity to go and have a ticket to come every year if you want. But there's very little, there's very little that you sort of get as a former alumni. Like you said,
they do like the Legends. Have you done the Legends Day stuff at all?
Not too much. I think I did a little, again, like now I'm sort of the other side of the country is a little bit more challenging, but there's
right.
Yeah, there's little bits here and there.
They do like the big autograph session the day before the race, and they bring back a bunch of the old drivers.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little bit selective as to who they who brings back, or I'm not really sure. I know it was not something that I had sort of really been involved in, and maybe I would be now. I think actually they probably have my wrong mailing address on file. In fact, I know they do. So who knows? Maybe I'm saying all this and they're sending me all this information, all this stuff, and I'm just like, hey, I don't know.
I mean, they had some pretty random drivers. I don't think that. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think you're qualified to.
You think Doug's there? Like Alex just keeps ignoring us. Why?
That's actually it's a good point. Maybe I should reach out and be like, actually, but I do think it's something that's like as a it is something that like is, it's a big deal. There's so few people that are alive that have done it. And again, you look at the people in the course of, history that have raced in it. It's insane when you think of other sporting events like, the Super Bowl, or again, we just talked about like the Olympics or stuff and things like that. It's such a small number of people that it's a really exclusive club. And I think, again, it regardless of how many times you race it, like there is no question that it gets into your veins, and it's something that doesn't go away. Like you feel that sort of exclusivity, and you feel different having competed in it than having not competed in, regardless of how well you competed. I mean, like, I've had a year where, we were at the front challenging, and then I had the very following year, where it was like bumping into the field by last minute as the bell's going off, and it was a crazy bump day experience. Didn't make any difference. Like the 500 is the 500, and whether you're winning it or coming in last, like there is a feeling around it that is, I'm sure there are other sports and that where people will say, they felt a similar thing, but it's hard to, it's hard to think that, of what else, that there aren't many things out there that can.
Right. Maybe the Super Bowl, but yeah, like when it comes to the 500, I really don't know.
Even the Super Bowl, like I don't know, like if it's, again, I'm not a footballer, but I don't know. I have a hard time to feel like the Super Bowl can have that mystique that Indy has. I mean, we all know it, we all see it.
Right.
Driving through those tunnels, there's something that gives you those sort of goosebumps. I think Le Mans is probably a similar thing for a lot of sports car drivers. That there's maybe something there, but Indy is just it's weird. It's like an environment that is very, very hard to put into words. And yeah, so like it is one of those things that stays with you regardless of just how, and not just the drivers, but like the people that work in it, that are like, it's across the board. It just has something about it that is like indescribable and not like anything else that I can really think of.
What is that first 500 race like? I mean, your first year in the race. I mean, what is that like on race morning? I mean, I'm sure a lot of butterflies, or I mean, when does it actually feel like a normal race?
I mean, every driver's like, oh, you just treat it as a normal race. It's just another day in the office. It isn't. It just isn't. You try and trick yourself mentally to think that, because you have to, because otherwise it's just very easy to get overwhelmed by the whole experience. But I mean, like the whole, especially my first time, it was 3 weeks of Indy. It wasn't, the condensed schedule that it is now. And, you're just nervous and stressed for weeks and weeks on end, it feels like. And it's like, you just, you're constantly having this sort of weight on you. And the day of the race, it's like you feel it massively. I mean, for me, like I get really nervous. I wouldn't sleep the night before. I'd have to really fight to get any sort of food inside me. And you're just constantly trying to convince yourself it's just another day, it's just another race. Like this is it's just like it was at any other weekend. In some ways, again, one of the hindsight looking back, I wish I'd spent more time soaking it in and being like, this is freaking cool. Like, I mean, yes, I was thinking it in the back of my mind, but you're always trying to block it off, and you're trying to be, play it cool to yourself. When in reality, all you want to do is be like this is just madness. Like look at where I am right now, and look at this, and like just really soak in and enjoy that whole experience. Because yeah, you like, in the moment you tend to think of it as, again, it's a pressure environment. You've got to deliver, you've got to perform. Like, your next season's maybe hanging on it. There's potential prize money at play, and all these different things that make it a very, very stressful experience. I wish in a way I'd spent more time just pulling back some of those pressures and just enjoying the experience. But I mean, maybe that's part of it as well, is like just that level of pressure is again, just something that is hard to explain. And again, unlike a lot of racing series with Indy, with the speeds, with the, with knowing what can happen when it goes wrong, even just a small crash at Indy, like it hurts. And that anything that happens there is, the risks are high. That brings another level to it. Like, again, just the adrenaline, and the race is so long that, that adrenaline is so high for so long. Like I've never felt tiredness like I have after Indy, and it's not a physical tiredness. It's just a absolute mental just shutdown from 3 weeks at that point, 2 weeks, I think, in the last 2 years, but just all those endless weeks of preparation and being ready for it. Then this sort of stressful race where you are mentally on it for, 3.5, 4 hours. And then when it ends, it's just, I mean, I remember people saying, oh, we've got this party or whatever it is, like after the race, like, I could barely move. It's like I can't even think about going out and partying. Like I want to, but like I just need to just go chill, relax, like just mental, just shut down. And I think that's just all this part of Indy, of just like how big it is, that you try and shut it out as much as you can and think of it as another race, but it isn't. Like, it affects you massively. It's just, again, one of the reasons why it's so cool.
You talked about coming underneath the tunnel off 16th Street, and every guest we've had on here that we've talked to about, be it Paul Page or Mark Janes, who's in, announcer now, or other drivers, we've all talked about driving around those tunnels, and then once you pull up and you see the museum, the world's different. Whatever happens on the other side of that tunnel is much different than what happens on that side of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And you can feel it. It is, and we've talked about, like I said, with other guests, there is something in the air inside that place, and I don't know what it is, and I think it obviously means something different to everybody. For you, it's one thing. For me, it's has a lot to do with my family, and for Aaron, it's going to be something else. And it's so funny how we, ever since we started doing this show, the people we've talked to about that, that's something we all share that same feeling for whatever reason. And it doesn't have to be somebody who's competed, or is so in touch with it. It could be just this family that goes and does this one thing one time a year, and it means so much to them as well. There's something just different about it, and I've never been able to explain it.
No, and I think that's sort of the magic of it, that it is inexplainable. There's no, and you can't. Somebody that hasn't experienced it, it's hard for them to understand. You can't understand it. You hear it from a lot of people, so you think, okay, there must be something true about it, but you just, I always tell people, like, it's just one of those events you have to go to, but it just sort of captivates you. And like you said, everybody has different reasons, different feelings, different emotions that it draws, but there's just something, like you said, something in the air there that tends to to grab people. And it doesn't matter who you are. It's a very, very strange place. And not living in Indiana now, having lived there for 10 years, like I miss that. I miss not being, being near the track and, sort of having that. So, but it's still there. You go back years later, it's that same feeling as you go under the tunnel. It's a crazy place.
As somebody who competed in the full series as a driver, and I've often wondered this, and I don't think I've ever asked this of anybody. Do you think almost how big that one race is maybe hurts the rest of the series a little bit, because the rest of the series cannot match that one day? And I know that there's outliers, right? Long Beach is its own thing. I think Road America is really kind of getting its feet under it, and Mid Ohio seems to really have its feet under it. But I've often kind of wondered, I mean, we could even go back to your last race, which was Vegas. In a way, they were trying to create an event to kind of match the 500 for the end of the year. And I just think that one event's so big, it just kind of dwarfs the rest of the series.
No, I think that's fair. There's definitely a perception, I think, in Europe of, I mean, I don't know if it's still the case, but I think at the time there was sort of a perception that, the Indy 500 is what you want, and the rest of it. I mean, like, we saw it with Alonso coming over, and, like, he wanted the Indy 500 for obvious reasons. And, the allure of, at least at that point in his career, of going sort of full time was not really something that had that same sort of gravitational pull. I think it is possible that, like, to have the Indy 500 as big and as sort of magical it takes away from the other races. If it wasn't as big, and the whole, like, it's difficult. Like, what do you prefer? I mean, if you ask a driver, any driver is going to say, I want to win the 500. And if I win the championship, that's great. But, like, the 500 is what I want. So it is it's strange how one race in a series where it's the same cars for the most part, same drivers racing week in, week out, and you can just go to one venue and it have this whole different meaning. Again, like, we talked about this earlier with Monaco and Formula One. Like, it's just not the same thing. Like, yes, it's a magical, cool venue going racing around Monaco, but it's not the same. It's still another race. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know, for better or for worse, but I think it does have a bit of an impact. And it becomes a focus. I mean, from a driver, it's nice because you can have a focus on a series, but then again, one, like in 2011 for me, or 2010, like one good year in Indy made up for like the whole run up to that race in the season had been terrible. Like nothing was going to plan, everything was sort of bad, and then you have a great Indy, and it was like, whatever happens the rest of the season, I don't care. This season's a success. It's a weird. It is weird. It's very different to again any other form of racing really. But it definitely has an impact on, I think, the rest of the series, and maybe it doesn't have that same. I don't know if like people who watch the 500 for whatever reason, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get them hooked in the 500 and they're going to be hooked in IndyCar full time. Right. It could be that you're again, it's like a bit like me with the Olympics. Like I will watch a certain sport like swimming and I will be super into it in the Olympics and I'll know everybody and I'll watch it, but I'm not going to watch the rest of the swimming competitions, right, even if it's the same people. And I think it has a similar thing where it is so big, but it doesn't necessarily. I mean, it obviously has some halo effect on the rest of the series, obviously, but it's its own beast.
Aaron, would you say, we had Mario on the show not too long ago, actually. And, Aaron, we talked to him, but we really didn't ask him about that. But, I mean, it's amazing that for everything he's done, and he's done almost all of it, he's still known for winning the Indy 500. I mean, that's how he's introduced. I mean, he's a Formula One champ, Daytona 500 champ, arguably maybe the greatest race car driver ever.
He's still driving at 200 mile an hour, and he's in his 80s, which is just insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is amazing how that one event has that appeal, and I think that's kept him young. I mean, I think he's become the biggest ambassador for IndyCar racing, and I really think that those days in those cars just have kept him a young man and in spirit,
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And like to your point before about the Vegas race, trying to hype that up, there's just, they tried a lot and it was a cool weekend. I mean, obviously with the exception of obviously everything that happened during the race, but like the build up to it was, was great to be a part of, but it's not the same thing. Like it just, and it could never be, I don't think any race you could build up. It's the history, it's everything. You can't start up a new, nobody could. Formula One couldn't. Any other series couldn't. It's just, it's, and I'm sure with people like Mario that, have raced it all those times, have done everything. I'm sure. I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine it is probably the number one thing on his list as well of everything that he's done is like, 500.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Do you, and we've mentioned Vegas a few times, and obviously anybody who knows much about the sport knows what happened in Vegas, and very, very sad day. And but that you've also talked about that was your last race. That was such a weird event in time because so many things, the fallout from that one event was so massive. I mean, Randy, and I don't know what your opinion. Randy kind of was the fall guy in a lot of ways in that. I felt like, and I think you can really track a lot of the sports momentum today back to when Randy kind of assumed that position.
Yeah.
And then that was like your last race, and that was the last time Danica ran when the last time she ran IndyCar, but that's last race she ran, I believe, before she went to stock cars. And of course, Dan passed, and I don't know, kind of take us not so much through the tragedy of the event, but kind of just through that period where like you were involved in that crash too, right?
Yeah, I was.
and kind of what your fallout was from that race, because as we established, you know, it was your last IndyCar race. Kind of
Yeah.
what led to that being your last race?
Well, I think number one, I knew that I needed to find some form of funding. I had a couple of options of teams that were like, yes, like Sam Schmidt was one that had a really good deal for me on the table if I could find just a little bit of funding, and then they had other sponsors that would fund the rest. And you know, I worked hard over the end of the winter, and I thought I had a sponsor lined up. It fell through last minute, and then that was sort of like, okay, at this point, especially with me, like I had kids, I had to put food on the table. I couldn't just say, okay, I'm just going to go bunk up and live on the couch of a mechanic or whatever, and we'll, you know, I'll wait it out and see if I can get something back in. I had to make a bit of a switch. So the stopping wasn't because of, you know, of that race, but that race
Right.
did have a big impact. I mean, I remember going away from that thinking, you know, again, that year I was in not a competitive car and a very small team. And I remember thinking to myself, like, unless I can do it properly, unless I can come in, you know, I think I don't know, I was midfield in that race at the time and qualified midfield. And I just remember thinking, like, it's not worth it to me to risk that much. And we all knew going into that race that it was a huge risk. I mean, we'd all drivers had spoken about it, expressed concern, felt like it was sort of an entertainment play and at the sort of expense of our safety. And I just remember, coming out of it saying, I'm going to do it properly or I'm not going to do it at all. That's not to say if I'd have had an offer from a small team or whatever that actually I would have just said, you know what, actually I want to be in it. But I was trying to convince myself that, you know, you're going about this the right way. There's a few teams that you will look to, talk to. If this sponsorship doesn't work out and you don't get that, move on, go do something else. Like maybe that would be sport, like who knows what that would be, but go do something else. And yeah, it was just, I think it was definitely sort of a life-changing weekend, I think, for probably everybody involved. And there's a sort of bond, I think, between drivers that experienced that weekend and experienced the sort of that moment between, the accident and leaving the racetrack, of just how those events unfolded, like when we found out what we did, because the race at that point was still technically on, like, how do we finish this weekend? What do we do? Mario giving his opinions of, hey, if we don't finish a race, there may not be an IndyCar next year. This could topple the series. Talking about staging a race of like, well, we'll go and drive, but we won't actually be racing each other, even though people were emotional. And then, I mean, it really actually, on all credit to Randy, he came up and was like, no, we have a parade and we call this. But it was, like all of those just sort of emotions that were going on and just in a room between, however many of those there were, was it 33 drivers that race? Something like, I think it was 33. Like and, just a handful of officials. And, it was just one of those situations that, like, I've never experienced anything like it before or after. And yeah, it was just a complete monumental shift in, like, again, like you talk about learning things about yourself as a person and just experiencing all sorts of different emotions. And, obviously knowing Dan well and knowing Dan's family and all those things, like it was a horrible, sort of period, but sort of, again, eye-opening to me of, I need to do this right. Like the situation that I'm in of, racing a car that at this point isn't competitive is not that entertaining to me. Like I want to be winning races. I don't want to be making up the numbers. And Vegas was a clear indication of like what's the point in coming here to finish midfield? Like either I get there where I can go and win, or I can run up front and I can sort of compete to the level that I feel like I'm capable of, or call it quits and go find something else to do. Because, risking everything just to be a part of the show, like the Indy 500, we talked about that. It's different. Like you just want to be a part. Like there is an element of just being a part of the show means something. Outside of that, in any other race, being a part of the show didn't mean anything. Being a part of the show, like you were there to win. Indy was that only exception where, again, the magic of Indy, whatever it is, being part of it meant something. So yeah, I was just very clear afterwards that I need to find an opportunity to be competitive, or or maybe this isn't, maybe it's time to look elsewhere. As I said, I didn't have any sort of real options that came about after that. And if there was from a smaller team, being honest, I probably would have revoked my thoughts, and gone and done it, just because, hey, it's a race car, and but yeah, it was definitely a big transition point for me, and I wish it wasn't my last race. Like, I wish it wasn't in those circumstances, but as I said, there's a lot of things that happened that weekend, a year or two later with Justin, and you never know what was going to happen. So for me, it was just, it didn't feel like that sort of feeling of I would do anything for that not to be my last race. The fact that it was just is fine with me. It was just a really difficult weekend and a bonding weekend with just the people that were sort of involved. That, like, I know there are only 32 other people like in the world that experienced what those of us on track experienced that day, and it's an experience that is very, very unique. And I think, like, tragic events in general, when you have a group of people that are involved in some very tragic event, like, it does form some sort of bond and some sort of thing that other people can't understand. So, or unless you were in it, you can't really explain that. So yeah, it was one of those weekends.
And it's weird because I always hear, like, older people talk about, people like Scott's age, sorry, Scott, but people like, talk about like big events in history, like landing on the moon or whatever. They would say, like, I remember exactly where I was when I heard that. For me, the one event is that race. Like, I remember exactly where I was when that happened, because Dan was, kind of like a role model for me. He was someone I always, really kind of looked up to, and I was a huge fan. And I just remember, really devastated me. And I might tell exactly where I was, and I was in Chicago. And I remember the next day, actually, ironically, we were in like Nordstrom's or something, and they have a TV on. It was like CNN, and you were on there. I think it was CNN. But they were interviewing you.
Some stuff with CNN, yeah. I think. It was. And again, it's like, because I think I don't know why we were locked in Vegas for so long, but it felt like we were in Vegas for at least a couple of days or so after the race. I don't remember why we couldn't have just gone home. Like, that would have seemed like the logical thing to do. But
I didn't realize
I just remember being in Vegas in the hotel room, and just phone ringing off the hook, emails everywhere, just like, because it just blew up to, not just US media, but like, especially in like the UK, global, but in the UK was huge too. Just, given obviously Dan's nationality, and it, you were just being bombarded with media to a level that, never experienced before. And then we had this sort of moral battle of, I remember talking to other drivers, especially Tony Kanaan, and being like, hey, we're all getting all these media requests, but what we're seeing here is the media is running with stories that aren't fair. They aren't true. That they're talking about, did desperation lead to this because of the way they did it, starting at the back and stuff. And there was sort of a decision of like, hey, those of us that feel like we are capable of going and talking about this, we need to try and change the narrative so that it's not about this, like, say it for what it is, that this was just the perfect storm of like just pure unlucky, and talk about like Dan as the person that like he was, and the family man that he is, and like tell the real story, and not let some of the tabloids start going out of control with this. So yeah, CNN was one of them, and there was a few others too, where it became this sort of media circus, but of something that it felt like, we need to do. But again, it was this moral battle. I remember there was a lot of controversy within the drivers of one driver that went on TV with their sponsor shirt on. And it was like, well, wait a minute, like and that driver didn't even think about it at the time. It was like, it just didn't even cross the mind. You're so used to doing it. But there was all this sort of moral battle of like, we don't want to say anything. We don't want to be seen as trying to profit from media, because that was wrong. But at the same point, we need Dan's story to be told, and not let people, come up with these wild accusations as to what happened during the weekend. So it was just this like awful time. And like you said, I think everybody, you know, in the racing world would know where they were at that moment. It was just like that. Again, another one of those sort of experience, like a life-changing experience in unlike Indy, in that positive way, in just a negative way, and just a sort of, I guess, a learning way. But yeah, just like again, an experience that I've never experienced, and I hope to never experience anything like it again.
Yeah, I was at Disney, and Robin and I were at Disney.
Disneyland or Disney World?
Disney World. And I was coming back to the hotel, and I missed the start of the race. She called me. She said, "Oh my God, you're not gonna believe what you're gonna see." And I was parking the car, and I went upstairs, and I watched those replays, and I was just stunned at what I'd seen. And it was, I've been around a lot of auto racing in my life, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. And yeah, I'll never forget that day. It was just, and like I was texting back and forth with some people, and I said, "Man, this don't look good. This looks really, really bad." For Dan, and obviously, unfortunately, that was true. And yeah, and it was terrible. And another day kind of goes along with that, but it had a different result. At least for me, is when Dixon crashed at the Speedway a few years ago, and
Yeah.
And that happened right in front of me. I like sitting in those stands right there on the inside because it's easy in, easy out, and he caught that, the catch fence, what was a few hundred feet from me, and I mean, I felt like I was watching that thing in slow motion, and it was just, just a grinding crash.
Yeah,
And
no, I remember that. I remember that one well. That was insane. That he was okay. Like again, you just have that sinking feeling.
Sitting there watching it in person, no way I thought the outcome was going to be what it was. Just and that's, thankfully it was, though. But we've kind of talked about, we've kind of alluded to it a little bit, and you're a normal working Joe these days, and living as fairly normal as life as any of us can. What do you do these days?
Well, so I made it. So right now, it seems like a very big transition. Like I sort of lead a content brand and SEO sort of part of an organization that is basically a technology real estate company called Knock, that is trying to revolutionize the way and make buying a home simpler. It's like basically doing marketing, and that seems very different from obviously what I was doing. There was a progression to that. So, like after racing, I actually started writing and doing some media stuff about cars, and I was sort of doing test drives of various different really supercars and things like that. And go try
that sprint car. Me and Scott were just talking about that sprint car video at Ventura Speedway.
Ventura, yeah. So I did stuff like that, and was just really trying to leverage the the sort of the racing side of things and my driving to go drive some cool things and make cool videos and write articles. And I did that for a number of years. And that sort of led me, I basically, was realizing that, like, as fun as that was, and that was a great way to transition out of racing, because, having a career as a race car driver, like, it is the most fun you can have. Like, we are spoiling ourselves because, we're just driving fast cars, and then you come home and you're talking to your engineers and what have you, but you don't really have a whole lot to do other than train, some sponsor engagements maybe, and then you go into your next race, and it's a great existence. So going into a world where I'm just driving fast cars and doing drifts and putting it on camera, like, that was great. But I pretty quickly realized that just from a career perspective, it's fun, but there's a little bit of a glass ceiling there, and I wanted to sort of move beyond that, which meant going into sort of corporate, basically taking my driving and car and writing media experience and bringing that into a company, which that company was a company that used to buy and that would basically try and revolutionize buying and selling. Actually, Carvana's equivalent. It was Carvana's main rival at the time. So I could jump into that, and they would be like, oh, cool, we've got like the race car driver on staff. That's cool. We'll have some great content from him and things like that. But that entrance into sort of the corporate America world in technology and in the Bay Area here, that then led me to, to sort of step then outside of, same job, but outside of cars. And I sort of intentionally went away from just being the car guy, because I was very pigeonholed into a specific role. And I wanted to try and broaden that to where, I could work for any company, and like, no matter what happens in life, if, COVID happens, which we didn't know about, and they lay off people, that like, I have places to go versus just being, like a car guy, a very specific role. So it was sort of by design, but, but it's a far cry from what I used to do. And like I said, very, as somebody that's used to the adrenaline rush and, and that side of things, like, yeah, it's been a bit of an adjustment. As I said, it's been a long time now. So like I'm pretty well adjusted to it, but, that's the thing. Like, yeah, you come off a career racing, at the highest level and competing and doing this, and then you have this, what now? And in my case, yeah, like, you could, maybe carry on doing something in racing to a degree. But in my case, I'm like, I want to start and try and build a successful career outside of racing that has the longevity that I can, do what I want to do for something, just a whole new career. So yeah, it was basically rip up the playbook, start from scratch, leverage what I could from racing, and, try and bring something to help me sort of, get where I want to be a little bit quicker. But yeah, it's a whole 180-degree switch from anything that I'd done growing up. And I never would have expected it. When I was racing the last couple of years, I actually was like wanting it in a way, because I was a little bit disillusioned with how things had been going, and like feeling like I wasn't in the car that I could compete in. And I remember thinking to be candid, like not really earning any money at that point, like, barely enough money to live, just like, money here and there, just, the life of a race car driver without sponsors that isn't in a big team. You're just scrounging for what you can. And I remember thinking of the day, like, God, if I could be in like a well-paid job, like health insurance, all these sort of benefits and stuff like that, like that sounds amazing. Cause like, I'm terrified about what happens when I don't have a racing career and I have, and I got to try and figure life out. So, now I'm in that. I'm like, God, I wish, like I miss being back in the race car, but it's, the grass is always greener to a degree. And like I said, like inevitably as a sports person, there's going to be a finite time where career ends, whether that's age 20, 25, 30, 40, like whatever age it is, unless you're very, very lucky and you've made a ton of money over the years in your sport, and you can just turn off and go retire on a beach. For most people, yeah, you got to go figure out what's next. And that's, if anything, in fact, it is without question the most challenging part of all of us.
Is your racing career something that
I'm sorry,
like
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, like, are your coworkers, like, they ever, I mean, I'm guessing they're aware of like your racing career. But I mean, we've talked to guys where their families don't know much about the racing career. Like they've kind of like just kind of put that behind them. So would you say like your coworkers and stuff are kind of aware of your racing career and, maybe talk about it? Or
to a degree, yeah. I mean, I have, there's a few people that, there's a guy at my old job that lives in right by the Speedway. He joined as like a director of engineering or something. And, he was like, oh, I'm like I go to the 500 every year. Like as soon as I saw your name, like, oh, I knew exactly,
right.
When I pieced it together, I was like, oh, like, I know you. So like, there are people like that. And like, I'm not one of those people that tends to talk about it that much. I'll do it in the whole, like, 3 truths and a lie thing that you might do when you get you do an introduction.
Right.
And it's always, a fun fact, it'd be like, yeah, I'll throw it out. Because like, I don't have any other fun facts really. So like, that's a cool one. Like the Indy 500 is cool. So I'll always throw that out there. So usually people know.
People probably think that's a lie, right? I mean, do people
exactly.
Actually,
exactly. Like, nah, that's not right. But yeah, I mean, I think most people know. and it's really dependent on, you know, are they like this? And that's the crazy thing. There's a lot of people that know nothing about racing, and that's what you sort of learn in after being out of the racing bubble. Because when I was in that racing bubble, it just felt like everybody knows everything, and like everybody is like fascinated by this sport. Not everybody, but you know what I mean. Like you're in this bubble. When you step out of that bubble, you realize that it is still a relatively, you know, small sport. I mean, there are obviously way smaller sports, but it just doesn't have that sort of notoriety. So like people know of the 500, but there are actually very few people that can name drivers in it and stuff, which is sort of sad to see as you sort of step out of that bubble and into a world where, you know, you don't have that. But there are always a few people that do know and appreciate it, and it's nice to have those sort of conversations. And yeah, like for me, like I said, I'm not one that's running around with it on a t-shirt, you know, telling everybody that I meet. You know, I'm just doing my thing. But if it comes up, I'll talk about it.
Yeah, a while ago when you were talking about, it made me think of two things. One, that is kind of the dark secret about, I don't know, you'd say all of professional racing with a few exceptions, not as much money there as people think there is to be a driver. And I think we all know drivers who are fairly well known who aren't making any money.
Yep.
You know,
Like Connor
for their
Daly would be a
racing.
great example of that.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like an example was that Vegas race. So before the race, you know, like I was, you know, trying, like almost feeling lucky that I had a salary at Dale Coyne, because again, like I had no funding, no nothing. He was funding that drive all himself.
Wow.
You know, so it was like you get just a little bit there, and you know, hope that you know you kind of, again, just hoping that you find that golden ticket that gets you that big contract. But you know, at the Vegas race, I remember going there. You know, IndyCar driver, finished fourth in the Indy 500 the year before. You know, had won the Rookie of the Year the year before, and I, you know, went to, you know, Vegas hotel. I think I was staying in the Bellagio. Like with anything, you put down your card for incidentals. In Vegas, they take a much larger cut because it's Vegas, and you could run up a pretty big bill pretty quickly. And I remember it like basically wiping out my account and being there like, I don't have enough money to go even get food. Like literally walking around Vegas, like, can I find a cheap sandwich shop? Because, you know, going to a restaurant or a meal or something is like, I don't have that right now. I mean, I literally had $0 in the account. And that was, you know, Vegas IndyCar weekend. And you're walking around in that, we said they made a big deal of that race, like some sort of celebrity, like in these fancy hotels and all of this. And the reality is, and again, like I knew I was one of many drivers that were in that similar sort of situation, where you either have money through family or whatever, or you have a sponsor and you're taking a cut off the top of that sponsorship, which is great, or you are, you know, being paid a handsome sum of money as one of the top drivers. Or if you don't have funding and you're doing a Connor Daly type of thing, or, you know, and many others, like Vitor Mira was doing it at the time. Darren Manning did it, you know, like there was a number of us around that sort of time that were, you know, getting opportunities but didn't have funding to bring to the table. Yeah, you're living on basically nothing. And you used to, like, so I guess in like Darren Manning's earlier days, like in his era, you could, because they had the prize money, and you could take a cut. You could have no salary. You could get a cut of prize money. Let's say you get 30% of the prize money, and you know, you make a handsome sum of money over the course of the year, even if you don't do that well. But when they changed that prize money, so it became team money, so it was like basically the teams then decided that, okay, this is effectively just funding for us. Like this isn't prize money anymore. It's just a lump sum that we will take as part of to lower the cost of our running. But it meant that there was no race by race prize money, other than maybe the Indy 500. Even that prize money was lumped into what the team money. So you had no way of earning prize money. So you suddenly went from, again, like the era of when like Darren Manning and Vitor and stuff were in those earlier days when there was the prize money and they could still, you know, make a decent living out of that, to then this sudden cutoff where the income stream for drivers just went. Again, it was another reason why we had a lot of conversations after Dan's accident in Vegas, because a lot of the drivers didn't have insurance then, and they couldn't afford insurance, and there was it's very unknown, and a lot of people I spoke to afterwards were just, I didn't really talk about it at the time, obviously, because you're in this racing bubble, but now, it's a lot of people just don't realize that, how challenging it can be. And again, that's one of the reasons why I was pretty disillusioned the last couple of years, because
Sure.
I was in a nice contract at Ganassi with with this deal that then just sort of all fell away, and you're like, God, like, how am I, I'm risking my life. At that weekend I didn't even have enough money to buy a sandwich, and I've got to figure out like what's next in my career when racing ends. And it was definitely feeling like I'm getting to a point where something has to happen, or this is going to be the end of my career. I have no qualifications to back up. It's not like I've been working in another field. Like, how the hell am I going to build a sustainable lifestyle out of starting from scratch at mid late 20s? So really, it's a really scary proposition. And I'm sure, like, I don't know the situations of today's drivers, but I'm sure there's a number of drivers that are in that similar situation and fighting that same battle internally as to like, what next, and how do I survive when that that racing career comes to an end? And is the racing career without sponsor viable as a career? It's it's there's a lot of nuances that I think a lot of people don't realize in a sport as big as as big as IndyCar and the Indy 500. You just assume, the outside world assumes very different things to what can often be the reality.
When you and it's not even like you can go get a job Monday through Thursday and then go play on the weekends. Racing's a full, at that level, is absolutely 24/7 a full-time job. And it's tough. But
it is like, and again, I've noticed the difference here between, my girlfriend, who's, an Olympian in a synchronized swimming. So a much smaller sport. There isn't big money in that, especially in like the US. It's not like the top people there are earning a ton of money. So, you live in this world where, your objective is to get to the Olympics and to, it's not going to be a massive career, financial for you. You're doing it just for the love of the sport. And then you move into whatever it is that you're going to do next. With racing, because there is a lot of media attention around it, and you're sort of hyped up, you're around celebrities, you're racing the Indy 500, you're on TV. I think it's actually, there's an ego that can come with it in terms of, you almost feel more important maybe than you actually are. And certainly in those cases that like the finances surrounding it can, so it's funny. So you have this sort of feeling of, well, I don't want to go and like, maybe I could go find some part-time job or do this or do that. But like, I'm an IndyCar driver. Like, I shouldn't have to, you know what I mean? It's like it's very, again, tricks you in the mind because of all the, the applause and the stuff that's going on around you. And that again is the case for many different sports. I'm sure it's the case for like NFL and stuff like that. There are, as I said, like, I have that sort of personal, insight into smaller sports where, those people don't have that because they're not sort of in that public eye the same way as, we would be from a racing standpoint. So there was definitely a part with me where it's like, you had to just put your ego in check and be like, you know what, you just got to do like all of us have to do nowadays. It's just, you just got to go get a job and make some money and do whatever you got to do. But in that moment of like being an IndyCar driver, it's very easy to feel like, like I don't have those other options of maybe doing a little bit on the side here because like I'm an IndyCar driver and I, it's weird. Again, it's a bit of an ego like knock, or there's something that you have to learn to put in check at a certain point because that's not how the world works. And again, it goes back to that sort of defining yourself after racing. You define yourself as an IndyCar driver versus a person, and you start to figure out that that's not actually the case. So yeah, it's, as I said, this is just a very complicated thing that in the moment you don't really even think about or digest, and now a decade later, all these little things that you come to learn.
Yeah, it's funny. and I believe this is who the story I'd read about back in the day, like the NASCAR guys and that. Like they were talking about Harry Gant, and I don't know if you know who Harry Gant was, but he was very popular NASCAR driver in the 70s, 80s, and very good. He had his Skoal sponsorship, and but he had been a working man his whole life, like a lot of those guys were, and like he would race on Sunday, and he'd get home and he'd go put roofs on for a few days of the week, and that's what he
Yeah.
did. That's what his business, and and there was other guys that had lumber companies. It was such a different mindset for those guys. And of course, then the money got so good in the 90s and 2000s. Of course, people didn't do that in NASCAR, but I always kind of think about that now. But we were talking a while ago about kind of the end of the career, and it always kind of reminds me of, have you ever seen the movie Goodfellas?
Oh yeah.
So at the end, he's in witness protection, and he goes out and he picks up the paper, and he's just talking about living this normal life. And it's kind of you kind of equate it the same way, right? It's like, oh, okay, now he's out living this normal life, and he's just doing what everybody else does, and it's not near as exciting to him, and not near as fun for him. And I kind of think that for a race car driver, especially someone that had success like yourself, that I'd almost have to kind of feel a little bit of the same way. It's like, well, I guess I'll get the paper now. I don't drive race cars anymore,
Yeah. I mean, it is 100%. I mean, yeah, getting used to, like, for me, it was like, what do I channel that? I didn't realize how much I missed the competitive and adrenaline out of it. And it's like, how do you, like, in normal life, how do you channel that? When you're used to driving 240 mile an hour, around, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, like, a split second turning in too late is disaster. All these different like feelings that you have. Like, how do you get that in the normal world? And like, I mean, the answer is like you don't. and
Right.
I'm still trying to like figure out like what's that thing. I mean, the closest I had, which is totally different, but I found that I started doing some cycling and like bike racing and things like that, and that gave me a lot of. I realized that competitive element of like just compete, even if it's just competing against myself, like just trying to get better, even if it was like, like going up a climb one day on a bike and being able to look at my time and be a little bit faster, and then going into races and competing against others. And, those, yes, you're not going that fast, but, when you fall off a bike at 30 mile an hour and you get mangled up, in wearing nothing but Lycra, like that, there's a risk to that. So, it is trying to find those things that that can replace it. But the honest truth is that there isn't, unless you go back into that world. There's nothing that can really replace that adrenaline, and especially from like the level of IndyCar. Like I drove like the Thunder Hill 25 hours, or like some other smaller, like slower cars, things like that. Even that, you just don't get that rush that you do. Like driving a sports car, for instance, than an Indy car. Like that level of speed and adrenaline is like an oval racing. Like it's a whole other level. So even like dropping down into a sports car, like you're still missing some of that rush. You go back to normal life and it's like you have none of that. Like what do you do to sort of fill that that void, that sort of gap that that as a person you sort of want. Like I didn't really know I needed it that much at the time. It's just like racing was just my career, what I did. And then you realize that, yeah, I'm maybe not an adrenaline junkie, but like you're used to operating with that sort of, with just that sort of excitement. So yeah, then you got to try and figure out, where else do you get that from? It's hard to replicate Indy.
Have you ever talked to, you ever thought about being a driver coach, kind of a deal like that, or have you done that?
I did that for the first year after my IndyCar. So like 2012, I did that. I did a fair bit of coaching with like Pippa Mann. I was coaching at Sam Schmidt. So when Connor and Joseph Newgarden were there, like I was coaching for the team. I think I was, Victor Carbone was one of the teammates of them. So I was like officially with him. Also Gustavo Yackerman, I coached him, I think was that maybe 2012. So I did a couple of years of coaching, and for me, it wasn't my thing. Like in all honesty, I sort of left the racetrack after racing by design. So I did some media stuff too. I remember Fox News, I think it was, at the track. So not the obviously any of the commentating during the race, but like the pre-build-up stuff on the local Indiana news. I did some of that. And I think what I realized is just being around the racetrack and not driving was so difficult. It was, it's like breaking up with a longtime girlfriend or something and then being forced to like work next door on the same, like it's really difficult just to be around it and not be the driver. And I I felt like I was good at, actually, another one, I coached John Lacey in his Indy 500 run. So like I was doing this and I felt like I was, good at it and had some good insight, but I just didn't like it. I just hated not being the driver and sort of being on that other side. It just made me want to be back in the car. So for me, it was like, I almost knew that's really why I think I left the sort of, made that transition I did from like the auto journalism and off to where I am now, is because I just didn't want to be around. Like I needed to sort of disconnect and again, like find out who you are outside of racing. So the coaching was fun. And I thought that I, had stuff to bring there, but it was also, mildly agonizing of just,
Right.
being there at the track, being there at the 500, but being in the spotter stand with videos and, trying to coach. Just, I think for some drivers, former drivers, like that works. Like they just, like being a part of it, it gives them that connection to the sport that, that helps them. With me, it was like an all or nothing type of thing. Like I want to be driving. And if I'm not driving, I have to be doing something else because otherwise I'm just going to be spending my whole time like, just wishing that the phone would ring and I could find some sort of seat here or there, or, something would happen. And, that's also, again, my position was slightly different, that I had a, again, family. I needed to provide, I needed to put food on the table quickly. So I had to make those decisions based on sort of, future career, but also just for my own sanity of being around a racetrack and not being the driver. For me, it was better just to sort of walk away, disconnect, and then look back on it on years like now and think about how cool it is. And I'd love to go back to the 500 this year and other races and just, see some old friends and be around the paddock and not have that burning desire to still be in it. And I think that was partly just because, again, my career didn't finish when I wanted it to finish. Like it wasn't my decision to retire. That was just the way the cards fell.
Right. No, I fully understand that. I do. Well, Aaron, do you have anything else for this gentleman?
Just one last thing I was thinking about. So as Scott was saying, a good friend of the show, and Scott's actually kind of like his uncle, Jagger Jones, who's driving in the USF 2000 this season, and he's had a lot of success in the testing and all that. He's been like the quickest in most of the sessions. When you look at a driver like that, being a driver yourself who's kind of worked through all the ranks of racing, had tons of success, and also race at the top level of your sport, what would be your biggest advice to someone like that?
I mean, I think it's the reality of the grind and how much you have to dedicate and push, and it's sort of a level of determination, especially like, again, it depends on the situation, if you have funding behind you or whatever, but like ultimately you just have to be so utterly dedicated and ruthless and really just do everything in your power to achieve what you want to achieve. I think it's so difficult to get there, and you're faced with sort of a lot of adversity along the way. So it just requires, like, you just have to have that love for it and that desire and that determination. I think if you have that, you can then achieve anything. Like if you've got the skill set and you have that burning desire to just like, that is where I'm going to get. I think that's sort of the number one thing. It's because what you don't want to do is have those, we talked about what ifs earlier today, but you don't want to have those what ifs after your career of, what if I did that? What did I did I give it everything I had? Like, was there another level that I could have gone to? Could I have, done, and not just in the car, but like outside, because we all know that like how you are outside the car and working to find sponsors and building connections, and like that's as big a part of it. And you just don't want to be left with any sort of regrets as, is there more I could have done? So I think just, that absolute dedication, even when things are going well, of just putting in everything that you have is the most crucial thing. And I do think, just from a sort of a standing, now being sort of further on, is that, I think for me, I don't have any regrets. Like I feel like I did do everything I could do. So I think that was good. But I think also not letting yourself get ahead of yourself, in that it is a tough sport. There is a lot of ups and downs, and be prepared for those mentally, for those ups and downs. Because it isn't just going to be all rosy and this big contract comes along. I mean, maybe it is, but if you're lucky, but you just got to be prepared for that grind and know that it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and it comes down to how badly do you want it. And I think you see those guys that are successful are the guys that, they want it more than anybody else, and they put everything into it. And yeah, sometimes the cards will fall on your lap. Sometimes they'll go the other way. But the biggest thing that you can control is that level of determination and desire. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the same thing with any sport or anything in life. It's like just putting everything into it. But with this, I think that is the case. That's how you separate yourself, is you're willing to go that extra mile, to put that extra bit of time in, to work that little bit harder, and it pays off.
Yeah, I equate it to for 99% of the people trying to become a professional racer, I equate it to trying to fly a jet fighter through the eye of a needle. I mean, you have such a small margin of error in terms of, the right decisions, the relationships you build. And I'm a big person on relationships. I think you should always try to cultivate any relationship you have, and not just maybe somebody you think can take you somewhere, but with the people around you. I'm a big relationship guy, but I just think for the average person, it's so hard to do, that there's so little margin of room for error, that you just, like you said, you just have to exploit everything that you have at your benefit.
Yeah.
And minimize the things that may be your detriment. And then you just, at the end of the day, you're kind of, if you've done all that, and if the gods are smiling on you, it works out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, I mean, I think from my side too, like I had thoughts as well, sort of afterwards, as like, was, again, like as you always do, like, was there more? Was there a relationship that I could have, done more? Like, could I have been, more, I sort of always had and it's sort of more of my personality, of like the sort of nice guy, laid back approach, like, what if I wasn't? What if I was a little bit more, a little bit, a little bit, push a little bit more here or there, or be a little bit edgier there, or like, maybe more on the ruthless level or whatever. Like, is there something I could have done there? I think ultimately, like, to me, I came back to no, I think, but building those relationships, whether it's, like you said, relationships that can take you somewhere, building those relationships with engineers, with mechanics, just relationship fostering, what sponsors, all of it in general, I just think is so important. And I think all you can do is just be like who you are, and just put, like, in my case, like, again, you can do all the what ifs of, I mean, I've had like various team owners, for instance, where it's like, yeah, I felt like my personality didn't gel as well with them as, they're looking for the playboy, the crazy person. Like, there's, I don't want to name names, but there's a few people out there that they are a little harder to get on with. And you think, oh, what if I'd have, changed my approach a little bit? Could I have, kind of snuggled up closer to them? And I think ultimately you just have to be sort of who you are, put your best foot forward, put everything forward, do your, absolutely everything at your disposal. And ultimately, like, that's going to give you the best chance of winning out. And like I said, I don't look at it like for myself personally as a failure, like I got to a good level and had a good career. I just naturally, like you always want a little bit more. So I look at that and say, okay, it worked, like putting in that dedication of, in my case, like not having funding and just not giving up and keep knocking on doors and trying to be a decent person and build relationships and be genuine. Like it works, it gets you there. And like I said, then at some point you just have to see if the gods are shining on you or not. But you come away with no regrets. So yeah, I mean, I think again, same with any sport, same with anything in life. I think it's that same mentality.
I think a good example that Aaron and I can speak to, as far as we talked to Tice Carlson, I don't know, a few weeks ago, released the thing. And I've known Tice since since basically 1990. As far as the driver, now I knew him and his family a little bit before that, because his family sponsored my little league baseball team with their bail bond company. But he and his family took in a kid. He was like 18 at the time, and this kid wanted to go racing. And a teacher, he was a few years younger than Tice, but a teacher said, "Hey, if you like racing, you got to talk to Tice." And they got together, and basically he became like a little brother to Tice. Well, that guy today is Jeff Dickerson from Spire Motorsports. And so my point being is, you should always treat everybody nicely, not because you can necessarily maybe get something out of them later on, but you just never know who's going to be who. I mean, just because of what you are today, that doesn't mean what you're going to be tomorrow. And if you treat everybody with kindness and respect, who knows how life works out.
And I think to your point, not doing it because you're trying to get something out of somebody. I think that's, instantly that comes across, even if deep down you are fostering relationships because obviously you're hoping an opportunity comes about. Yeah, I think if you go into it with that mentality of getting something out of somebody, like the genuine side of it is lost, and it's probably not going to work. I think you be yourself, and you be a good person, and you treat people well, and hopefully good things happen. And maybe you get lucky and one of those people turns into something, has an opportunity. Like again, I can think of many, many, many people along the way that happened with me too. Like Gary Peterson as a great example of that. In my early Indy Lights years, you just you find the right people, you get on well with them, and that takes you one step, and you just keep going until until as far as you can. Yeah,
I agree. I think if you put enough positive energy in the world, you're going to get positive energy back. And I'm not necessarily saying in the form of, some great riches or anything like that, but just you just never know how relationships are going to work out and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Alex, this for me has been an absolute pleasure. I knew very little about you before we started talking. And it has really been, I mean, I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you have enjoyed talking to us. And in my book, you're a winner. I mean, to do the things you've done, so few people who ever dare to dream get as far as you did. So thank you so much.
I appreciate appreciate coming on. It's been fun, and like I said, nowadays I can just talk about it in a in a very candid, open way of like, here's the deal, here's how you feel, here's the situation, which at the time, in the moment, and even shortly after, you don't tend to do that. So now it's just fun to reminisce on those times and look back at it and say, that was a really fun period. And I'm glad that it all happened the way it did. And do I miss winning races? Hell yeah! But it's nice to look back and know that that had a good old run of it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you. I appreciate you responding to my email. I mean, there's a lot of guys who don't respond, so I really appreciate you responding and willing to do it.
Yeah, no, it's fun to talk to race fans and just talk about the great sport that we all love. So yeah, happy to.
Well, we appreciate that, and maybe in the future, maybe we do like an Indy 500 preview or something like that. If you're free, we would love to have you on. And again, it's just absolute pleasure.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you.
All
Take
right,
care.
thanks, Alex.